see if we could pass a resolution to ask UNESCO to do more to strengthen education standards at madrasas, and it's a complicated topic, and I think UNESCO is doing some work to assist governments.
Certainly, that we do really help member states, particularly the certain member states with this kind of school, and is to see how we assist them to really make sure the school curriculum will be really teaching the right value, promoting peace and peaceful coexistence. And also, I may maybe allow me to add a few words. Ambassador, a few months ago, I was privileged to visit your country, and I had a discussion with your Minister of Education, and also I visited your school. I talked to many professors and teachers of your country. I can feel how eager your people really want to rebuild the country, rebuild the education system, and they can really train the human resources you need. And one important thing UNESCO is doing there is the literacy work. And then we provide a literacy, of course, with the sponsorship from Japanese government. We have a big literacy program there, really provide the literacy education for girls and for women. We believe this is a really strong tool to play against the terrorists and really a peace building of your own country. And also, maybe I can mention in your neighboring country, Pakistan, and we worked closely with the Pakistani government, which there's a Malala Fund. And we were going to do there also to do the girls' education in those regions which the Taliban was active. So this is also another way to really fight for terrorists and also for the countries rebuilding their own and also the peace over there.
Carol.
Just to echo what's already been said, and just to remind that the guiding principles that we're being asked to support today, which I hope everybody will be doing, are about conflict sensitivity in education. They're about moving faster. They're about not waiting for things to happen, but really a speedier response. And also to say that there are places, and you mentioned Indonesia. Indonesia particularly comes to mind, where, again, with support of UNESCO, UNICEF, others, external government aid assistance, the government has engaged in providing support to madrasas where the madrasas have adopted the national curriculum. And so I think we have to think about how education is being delivered in many countries, but to assure that there is a broad-based national curriculum, again, the priorities of the government, but understand that, there are a variety of ways that education is being delivered. Just finally, one last thing we keep talking about conflict, but the issue of security and safety is such a critical issue. And I mentioned that also in the context of girls going to school, because it doesn't just have to be war. It really is, it's instability, it's danger, it's a perceived sense of not being safe that keeps so many children out of school. And so it's a wide range of interventions that we have to be involved in, and we have to be sensitive to them all the time.
Thanks so much. And we'll turn to Sierra Leone and then Algeria, but I just want to say that the ambassador from Afghanistan has been a strong voice in pointing out to all of us that Malalas exist not just in Pakistan, but in Afghanistan and elsewhere, and he's a very strong moral voice for those Malalas also. And Sierra Leone, please, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me thank all of you for organizing this program, and I just want to make a few comments for which I'll need your response. We all know that no nation can develop without a strong human resource base. And 3 sectors in state governance: health, agriculture, and education complement each other. But as you have commented, it is clear that the two seem to have gained much more international attention, even in terms of funding, which are agriculture and health. So how can UNICEF influence decisions at the highest level, internationally, to ensure that we create a kind of synergy that will be able to enhance supports in the educational sector. UNESCO, sorry. I am coming from Sierra Leone, and I am the Deputy Minister of Education. The realities there are very clear that because we are just coming from conflict, there are a whole lot of disadvantages affecting the educational sector. And most of the resources are being raised domestically, and they are not enough to actually reach our desired goals. We'll be able to reach our desired goals if we get enough international funding, which is not, well, easily forthcoming. So I'd like you to comment on this one as to how I'll be able to look at education, agriculture, and health. The last time I spoke with the UNICEF representative, now we have got many life-saving activities in Sierra Leone. We introduced a free health care. Many children are surviving, and so the primary schools are now full. We don't have enough infrastructure. There is agriculture going on. We need extension workers. On all of these, people need to be educated. But then the sector itself, education, we seem to be the nerve center for the transformation of the socioeconomic development of the country has got these challenges. So how can we synergize and move forward? Thank you very much.
Carol, I think that's a good one for you.
Well, again, as I said, we know that education financing, development assistance for education financing has somewhat stalled. There are still some significant actors in development assistance. The United Kingdom is still very active. Australia has strengthened its investment in education, identifying it as high priority. But I think in part because, I'm sorry to repeat what I said before, but there's been a bit of complacency as one is looking at the Millennium Development Goals. Remember, the MDG in education was a pretty narrow goal in relationship to the education for all goals. It was only, only is very important, but it was only completion of primary school. Didn't really even talk about quality very much. Although we're still not going to meet that goal, there's a perception that more has occurred there, but it was always about access and not about quality. But I do think that education is moving back up on the agenda these days. That doesn't mean immediately there's this big outflow of resources. But I believe in the context of the Global Education First initiative for the UN Secretary General to identify as one of his highest priorities for his second term that education is a critical issue. I believe that the Education Can't Wait, which is, again, bringing together the community, particularly around education in emergencies, has really generated more enthusiasm. I believe it's going, I mean, with all due respect to my own government, I think it's really exciting that in a week from now, there's going to be an event in Washington in which the U.S. government, indeed at the White House, in which the U.S. government will actually talk about education, which is good, because we're for health and food security. I mean, who are the major farmers and the small farmers? They're women, so if they get an education, they're going to be better farmers. Health, as I said before, we know that one of the critical contributors to the reduction of under 5 mortality, to increased health care for women, is education. So it plays a role in all of those. But we have to just stop talking only to ourselves. With all due respect to this room, we have to go out and talk to others, and we have to talk the language of others. We have to talk the language of the private sector. We have to talk the language of civil society. We have to talk the language of those who've been faceless too long, the marginalized. You know what? They're not so marginalized anymore. They're raising their smartphones, and we're seeing them everywhere from Aleppo to Yangon now. They're not so marginalized. Well, they're marginalized, but we're hearing those voices. We have to go out beyond just the education community, and we have got to get crisper and sharper and tighter on all the differences that education makes in economic growth, in reducing poverty, in increasing health, in reducing conflict, and we've got to get better at it. You know, we education people, if we could say something in 100 words, we use 1,000. And we've got to get better in our messages out there. And then we can try and raise some more money, because we need that money for education.
Well, before I go to Algeria and Uganda and Nigeria, I want to slip in a question of my own that is raised by Carol's last intervention. We have education meetings at UNESCO, and if they're on topics like girls' education, We launched a big global partnership on girls' education here with Hillary Clinton, or on ICTs in education. The room fills up with representatives from Microsoft and Procter & Gamble and Apple and Intel and Cisco and Google and Nokia and Packard Foundation, the GEMS Foundation, on and on and on and on. They're fighting to get in the room. And today, we don't have anybody from the private sector, I don't think, or hopefully we do, and I just don't know it. But why is it difficult to get the private sector partners to be as excited about conflict education as they are about girls' education? That's a question.
Yeah, this question is a hard question, but I think probably one thing probably when we, according to our experience with working with the private sectors, sometimes they probably want to make sure they have a good cooperation, good project they can show. For post-conflict situations, sometimes they get feared. Maybe it's not really ready to do. But then I think in the future, we certainly will make more efforts to attract them to these areas.
Great.
I think it's a two-way street, frankly. In the health field, I think that people who've engaged in health have had an engagement with the private sector much longer than people who are in the education field. It doesn't have to be a love-love relationship or a hate-hate relationship, but it's existed longer, in part because of the role that pharma has played in health. In the area of education, you used to say private sector and people thought only textbooks, but today they are thinking about different things. They are thinking about technology, they are thinking about other kinds of services, and frankly, they're thinking about the future of business. If you look at the world today, the great majority of young people live in developing countries, by far the great majority. So where are the future consumers? Where are the future workers? Where are the future? Where is your future in business? It's not only, with all due respect, in North America or in Europe anymore. It's in the rest of the world. So good education, good quality education systems are very important for business, for their own business interests moving forward, which is fine. It should be in their business interests. And I think we're starting to see it more, but I agree with Mr. Tang, absolutely. Your investment in a conflict area is going to be a slower investment because you do, in fact, one of the important things about education is that education has the potential of bringing more stability and security in a conflict area, and what business is looking for is more stability and security before they're going to put their resources in. But I do think there's more engagement now, whether it's through the Global Business Council on Education or generally in terms of recognition by the private sector globally that without good education around the world, their businesses aren't going to do very well. So there's an awakening. They're still slumbering a bit, but there's an awakening going on. And I think going forward, we'll see more engagement of the private sector.
Thanks. We only have about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to take the 3 questions from the 3 delegations all together. And if you could state your question as briefly as possible. Algeria first, then we'll go to Uganda, and then we'll go to Nigeria. Algeria, please, you have the floor.
Merci. Mais je serais tenté de prendre exemple sur les personnages du panel qui, eux, prennent la parole suffisamment. Alors, permettez-moi, Monsieur le Président, de dire ce que j'avais à dire, mais autant que possible rapidement. Je dirais que bien que tardif, il est heureux en effet de constater que l'UNESCO ait eu enfin la bonne idée d'organiser un symposium sur ce problème crucial de l'éducation en situation de conflit et de fragilité. Sauf que je n'ai pas entendu quelqu'un parmi les gens qui se sont exprimés s'intéresser à un point qui me paraît pour ma part extrêmement important, c'est le point concernant les incidences tardives et souvent graves, car de nature psychopathologique, des situations de conflit. Le fait est que la violence en situation de conflit implique toujours des avatars psychologiques qui malheureusement survivent bien longtemps aux situations de conflit elles-mêmes. Je crois que sur ce point, tout le monde est d'accord. En tant que psychanalyste de formation, fût-ce aussi secrétaire général de la Commission nationale algérienne, je pourrais vous dresser un tableau exhaustif des différentes symptomatologies liées à ces situations de conflit que l'Algérie a connues, vous le savez bien, longtemps durant la décennie 90, violence due à un terrorisme dévastateur. Mais ce n'est pas le lieu. Ce que je voudrais tout simplement dire, et peut-être pour répondre un peu à la proposition de M. Tong, c'est vrai que l'éducation en situation de conflit est essentielle, mais elle ne peut fonctionner, me semble-t-il, que dans la mesure où il y a des actions de réorganisation, de reconstruction psychologique des enfants qui ont fait l'objet de ces traumatismes psychologiques. Car sans quoi, c'est le rejet scolaire, c'est le refus scolaire et si en dernière instance, l'échec scolaire. Alors pour terminer rapidement, je souhaiterais que l'UNESCO, comme elle nous a habitués à le faire, à partir de ce symposium, imagine des actions spécifiques pour que dans les pays concernés par la violence, quelle qu'elle fût, de quelque nature qu'elle soit, d'aller vers des enquêtes extensives qui puissent nous permettre de quantifier les résidus ou les stigmates de cette violence qui empêche aujourd'hui au moins en partie l'éducation de s'accomplir dans de bonnes conditions. Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'espère avoir été assez bref.
Thank you, and thank you so much for being brief. We appreciate that. We'll turn now to Uganda, and I'll just say, in introducing Uganda, that UNESCO has a Goodwill Ambassador, Forrest Whitaker, who works exactly on that topic of rebuilding children's psyche that have been impacted by violent situations in their countries, and a lot of his work is done in Uganda. Madame, the minister from Uganda, please.
I would like also to thank the panelists, and most importantly for identifying and inviting Uganda to come and participate in this very important symposium. My name is Jessica Alupo, the Minister of Education and Sports from Uganda. Mr. Chairman, I agree with most of the speakers who have said that the theme of this symposium is very crucial, e.g. conflict-sensitive education, why and how, because it remains a very hidden challenge to the provision of education to millions of learners across the world, and because it interferes with strong pillars of access, relevance, and quality of education. My concern, however, is that as Uganda, we have had experience in conflict which has interfered with the education cycle of millions of children. For instance, in the northern part of the country, we had that LRA war, which took nearly 2 decades. In the western part of the country, we had the ADF problem, which is on and off. And in the northeastern part of the country, we had the problem of cattle rustling, armed cattle rustlers, both within themselves and across borders. So I think that we would like to share our experience as Uganda, but most importantly, we would like to say that as Uganda, we managed to defeat all the facilitators of the conflict, especially in the north and also in the western part, and we do not have any other problems with any rebels in the country now. But what we have now is the problem of dealing with the post-conflict challenges. We have measures that were put in place during the conflict, like establishing emergency schools in areas where the IDPs were settled and secured. And we also had the challenges of trying to identify teachers who would manage under those circumstances to teach these learners. But currently, everybody has been encouraged to return back to their villages, and we have now a challenge of establishing education institutions where these learners have returned together with the communities. We have the challenges of psychological problems of both the adults and the learners. And we have the challenge of the provision of relevant education, for instance, technical education for skills, education for livelihood, education for competencies, and we're still grappling with the problem of addressing the curriculum issues, because the education system in most of the countries in Africa, Uganda inclusive, is more of education that tailors the learners into white-collar jobs, which are not available now. So my challenge is that we are now grappling with the post-conflict problems. But I agree that the theme is very important, and I also would like to recommend that if UNESCO, if INEE, and USAID would support countries across the world to be proactive in identifying these threats from these countries, so that we try to avoid the occurrence rather than moving into treating or curing the consequences. I would rather that we try to find a way of planning to be proactive, prevent this conflict, especially those that really spring from nowhere, and you just wonder when you look at the screen in the TV and you see that the Arab Spring, that in Mali there is something like this, and you really wonder what are the undercurrents. So I would like to request, as Uganda, as one of the developing countries, that these very powerful UN agencies, these very powerful UN established and very well-rooted organizations, in terms of promoting peace, should work very closely with us to try to ensure that we avoid the occurrences of these conflicts, and also those natural calamities, including floods now, which displace the learners, and we have to find emergency homes for the learners and also the teachers, the landslides, and because of the global warming and climate change. So I think my concern here is that let's try to be proactive where it is possible. But I would like to thank very sincerely once more the organizers of this symposium for identifying and inviting Uganda to come and participate in this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Minister. And now the ambassador from Nigeria, my dear friend Miriam Katikam.
Thank you very much, David. Let me thank Carol and Mr. Tang for their presentations. My question goes to Mr. Tang. You have a vast network of associated schools program and the UNESCO clubs, the network of parliamentarians. How do you intend to utilize the creative potentials in furthering education for peace and sustainable development, both in conflict and post-conflict situations? Because these days we hear less and less of the ASP and UNESCO clubs. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Tang, I'll give you the floor first to maybe respond to that question first, since it was directed right at you. And if you want to make any comments on the intervention from the distinguished Minister of Education from Uganda or from the former chair of the National Commission from Algeria.
Thank you. Just very briefly, for the Ambassador in Nigeria, definitely our associate school project is under the division for promoting education for peace, so and sustainable development. So actually, that's exactly our purpose, to put that unit under this division in order to use associate school network, which is about 8,000 schools around the world, to really push particularly the content for education for peace and sustainable development. And very soon we're going to celebrate the 60 years anniversary of this network. We're going to use this opportunity to really promote particularly education for peace and sustainable development. There's one word to conclude, probably with the minister from Uganda and also from Algeria. I think we certainly, there's two important factors UNESCO now is trying to work in this immediate reaction. One is psychological impact. Another one is vocational skills for the youth in order to have some immediate solution. In this way, we also work closely with UNICEF, with INEE, and we'll prepare the minimum training standard. We work closely with INEE on this activity. So certainly we are taking care of these areas. The last point I want to mention is, yes, we have to be proactively working with member states to see how we promoting education for peace, and so we can prevent the situation of conflicts. Hopefully, in our next generation, they will have a better value, and so then they wouldn't create other wars in the future. That's my really hope, and I think our education will have to have this as our objective. Thank you.
Carol, any final thoughts? And also, if the comments, of course, were kind of a global nature from Uganda, and on the issue of repairing psyche from Algeria, but we're very close to the end, so if you could just...
Be quick.
Yeah.
Just to say, psychosocial and traumatic challenges are very real. One of the very important reasons for an immediate response in all kinds of emergencies, and I'm pleased that the minister from Uganda reminded us that it's not only conflict but natural disasters that create emergencies, is getting children back into some kind of a learning environment, gives them some degree of normality in an otherwise abnormal type of situation. So we do need to keep in mind the traumatic impact for everyone, but particularly young people and children. So I appreciate very much the points made by the representative from Algeria. In terms of Uganda, on behalf of the Global Partnership for Education, we look forward to Uganda coming before our next board meeting, because the Global Partnership will be providing support for Uganda and education. And then just finally to say that for the Global Partnership, we are committed to these guiding principles, and we are building them into our work in support of countries' education sector plans, so that these sector plans will no longer be conflict blind going forward. So that's what we certainly intend to do moving forward. And I shouldn't just say moving forward, we've been doing it already. Some of you may recall that we were not very open and sensitive to conflict-affected countries when we first got started. There were some who said that, as we were the Fast Track Initiative, we weren't very fast. We were sometimes off track and not enough initiative. But we are trying to be more sensitive now to not only non-conflict affected countries, but conflict affected and emergency countries, and building these kinds of principles into our work with education sector plans. I thank you all very much for inviting me to participate today. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Any final words, Mr. Tang? You're set. Okay. So I just want to thank our panelists very much, Assistant Director General Tang and Carol Bellamy, the chair of GPE. I think this was a very productive panel, and I hope the audience feels the same. And we're very, very pleased to have the opportunity to do this. Thank you.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite for a short session of just about half an hour before we go to afternoon coffee, 3 people who've been working very, very hard on the INEE conflict-sensitive education pack. To launch that pack, I'm going to invite Yolande Miller-Granvaux from USAID, Maria Lucia Uribe, who's a coordinator of the INEE Working Group on Education and Fragility, and Martha Hewison from Save the Children, briefly to introduce and launch the pack.